Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Headings. I'm a graduate student at Pittsburgh State University, and I'm working with Doctors Angie George and Christine Brodsky here. We're running a project that's evaluating the avian and vegetative communities on previously stripped mined land, and this is a year one update for my project. So we're interested in looking at areas in southeast Kansas that are in Crawford and Cherokee counties. And this is a pretty unique area for the state because we are in that transitional area between the hardwood forests in Missouri and tallgrass prairies and the rest of eastern Kansas. And because of that habitat transition, we're in an area that is the western range of many bird species. So species like the prothonotary warbler, yellow-throated warbler, and things like the eastern wood pewee, we're getting a lot more detections of those birds in this area than we are in many other areas of the state. And then the other thing that makes southeast Kansas so unique is the mining history of this area. In Cherokee and Crawford counties, about 60% of those counties had shallow coal reserves underlying them. So starting in the 1860s all the way up through the mid 1970s, there's some pretty intensive surface coal mining in these two counties. And to do this mining, they use these big drag lines, which you can see pictured here. And the drag lines and mining strategies used in these areas resulted in a really altered landscape. So we have lots of pits and overburden piles that run adjacent to each other that are 60 to 100 feet deep and tall and are mostly filled up with water at this point. And because of the time period of when this mining action occurred, it was before any federal mining reclamation acts were put into effect. So much of the reclamation was done without strict guidelines. So some of the areas were just left to natural restoration, and some of them were planted with some plant species, but it's mostly been left up to natural restoration on the mine lands. So just a little bit about the mine-made wildlife areas that are in the two counties. We have 47 different wildlife areas totaling 14,500 acres. Most of it is the scrubby forest, which is in the foreground here, and there's about 4,000 acres of prairie and 1,500 acres of water. And all but 2,000 acres of this property was strip mined at some point. And because there was that large range of time that the mining occurred, it's in the wide range of successional stages. So there is some fairly matured forests, and then there's also some fairly new grasslands in comparison. And because of all this disturbance that occurred with the mining, many of the soils are not developed well. There's still a lot of overburden piles exposed, lots of acid runoff from the overburden piles. So it creates an environment that's susceptible to lots of invasive species. And that's what we have seen the first 2 years of data collection, is that there's a lot of woody invasion as well as invasion by forbs like Cercia lespidosa. And the shrubs that we're seeing the most out here are honeysuckle and autumn olive and black locust are the big three that we've seen. So some of the current management that's been practiced here, there's nothing too crazy. There's lots of prescribed burns, grass restoration where it's applicable, mowing to keep back the woody vegetation and livestock grazing. But the real difficulties, again, it goes back to the soil quality. If you can see here on the right side, we have a soil core that has really no topsoil on it. All of that is from overburden. And if you look closely, you can still see specks of coal littered in with the overburden there. So that just creates a really hard situation to restore without being, with it being economically viable. So the methods for my project are we're doing fixed radius point counts at 84 sampling locations. We're sticking to 3 habitat types really, which is the grasslands, forest, and rangeland, which are the biggest 3 habitat types in this area. And we're doing 5-minute point counts 3 times a year during the breeding season at each of our sampling locations. And additionally, we're going to be doing, we have been doing nest searching and monitoring according to the B-bird protocol, and we're focusing our efforts there on the shrub nesting species, trying to get a better idea of how they're interacting with the invasive woody vegetation here that's so prevalent. And then we also are doing basic vegetation data collections at each point count location and at each nest location. So this is our study area. Most of our points are in Cherokee County with some in Crawford, and then on the right side of this map, past the black line is the Missouri state line. So we have some sites up in Prairie State Park and in one of the state prairies called Washashi Prairie. So quick into results from point counts this summer. I'm just going to go over the swap species detections, which, if you're not familiar, is the species of most concern in the state of Kansas. So by far and away, the most detected swap species we saw was Dixisals, and then followed closely by Bell's vireo, which is encouraging to us because that is a species I am most concerned with seeing their nesting habits, as well as northern bobwhites, eastern wood pewees, meadowlarks, and down the line. And interesting note here is with the Henslow sparrows detections, those were all made in the Missouri side of our sites, and it'd be interesting to do some site analysis there to see if there's any vegetation characteristics that are unique to the Missouri side that aren't to the Kansas, because by eye, you really can't tell any differences why there would not be any Henslow sparrows in our areas. And then for nest survival, we monitored a total of 73 shrub nesting species this year, with 10 of them fledging young. And the majority of those were Bell's vireos, with 49 total, 9 fledging, and then 18 northern cardinal nests with 1 fledge, and 6 indigo buntings with no fledging. So looking more at why the Bell's vireo nest survival is the way it was, we had pretty comparable rates to previous studies done at Konza Prairie. They had 13% fledgling rates, and ours was 18%, so fairly similar. And then we believe why ours is a little higher is because in the study I'm referring to, there was a 70% parasitism rate by brown-headed cowbirds on that study, whereas ours, we only had 51%. And we did see high renests and abandonment rates on both the previous study and during ours. Bell's vireos are very well adapted to identifying brown-headed cowbird eggs and then removing their nests. So on this bottom picture, you can see brown-headed cowbird egg in the nest with Bell's vireos, and as well the brown-headed cowbird punctured 2 of those Bell's vireo eggs in this picture. And then above, we see one of our most common culprits for nest predation. We got the black-racked snake there. And if you look closely on the second third of his body there, you can see those big old lumps where the nestings are. So initial takeaways from this first year, mine lands seem to be providing habitat for really wide range of species, which we were excited to see. There's 75 species detected this summer, including 14 species of concern. And also the vegetation communities are really, really heavily influenced by invasive species. And that's especially in the forested sections that are harder to get in to do any management techniques to, just because they're so rugged and remote. The overburden piles are very steep, and it's hard to get any sort of equipment in there to do management. So what is next for this project is we're doing one more season of field work next summer, trying to collect as much data as possible. We'd like to identify habitat characteristics that are increasing Bell's Vireo's next success, as well as trying to construct some bird community and vegetation structure models to help inform the management here in the Minelands. Then quick acknowledgements, of course, Kansas Department of Wildlife Parks and Tourism, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Chickadee Checkoff Grants, and Pittsburgh State University. And if anyone has any questions, if you'd kindly leave them in the comment section below here on YouTube, or if you'd like, you can contact me directly at my email address there. So thank you for tuning in.